Our New Testament passage today comes from Romans chapter 12, verses 9 through 21. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal. Be ardent in spirit and serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Extend hospitality to strangers. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep, and live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay," says the Lord. So know if your enemies are hungry, feed them. And if they are thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. This is the word of the Lord. Well, I think we can all agree, there's not much doubt that things like hate speech and actions based on hate and revenge are the subject of many of our movies. They are seen on most of our news feeds these days. And it's understandable and it's human. If you have been the recipient of hateful actions, that experience is seared into your mind, into your body. Hatred hurts to the core. And it can squelch the spirit and it can change the trajectory of a life for the worse. But that is not inevitable. Hearts can mend, love can win. Many of these biblical stories that we read show us the tragedies of dysfunctional families, and yet they also sometimes give us the hope that love can heal the scars of hate. Now, the story that we're considering today is one of those stories, our Old Testament, our Hebrew story of Joseph. Well, it's one that begins with family strife, but it becomes an example of hope in desperate times. So we need to set the stage for the part that we read today, the prequel to today's reading. We find a young man that's maybe in his teens, Joseph, as he's being sold into slavery by his brothers. For Joseph was daddy's favorite. He knew what it felt like to be loved, but he was insensitive to the pain of others. In his privilege, he had not learned how to feel empathy for others. His 10 older brothers hated him for being their father's most beloved and for flaunting that privilege. They even discussed the possibility of killing him, but they settled on selling him off as a slave. And then they went back to tell their father that he'd been killed by wild animals while they were tending the sheep. So Joseph survived his brother's malicious act, but his life would be changed forever. Knowing no one, forced into hard labor. We can imagine the pain and the anger he felt as the days and the years progressed. Joseph was taken by his first captors to Egypt, and he was sold again a second time, this time to an Egyptian official named Potiphar. He was an overseer of the Pharaoh's security guards, and he put this young, healthy man to work. And in ways that probably surprised Joseph himself, he thrived. A kid who had never been given responsibility discovered that he had skills and he was stronger than he even knew. He proved to be a good organizer. Potiphar entrusted him and all that he was overseeing to Joseph's care. So here we have a story of transformation, not an instantaneous, miraculous transformation, but a description of that slow, painful process that life takes us through as we gain maturity, as we begin to heal in the human heart. The path to this beautiful family reunion that we're reading about, well, it was a long one. Just as Joseph was making a life for himself and proving his skills, even as a servant, another injustice takes place in his life. For his owner, his wife, found Joseph attractive, and she was a woman of means and used to getting her ways, and she let Joseph know that he was what she wanted. He explained his sense of responsibility and loyalty he felt for her husband, who had provided so much for him. But she followed him to where he was working. She grabs his shirt and uses her privilege to claim that this Hebrew slave had attacked her, and he was thrown into jail. Again, his life seems hopeless. If there is ever someone with good reason to be angry, to hate God, to hate the people around him for the sheer unfairness of life, that was Joseph at this moment in his life. We're told at this point that the Lord was with him, that maybe it was that he felt some sense of assurance that this was not the end of his story. Here is a victim of the selfish actions of powerful people. Rather than falling into despair, he became more attentive to the needs of others. He realized that if this could happen to him, maybe the people around him were struggling with things he didn't know, suffering as he was. The chief jailer noticed his compassion and made him caretaker of the other prisoners. Two people in particular that were under his care was a baker and a cupbearer who'd worked with the Pharaoh. We don't actually know what they did to end up in prison, but Joseph waited on them daily. One morning he notices that they are particularly disturbed and troubled, and he asks them why. They each had been dreaming the night before and wanted to know what their dreams meant. Well, Joseph knew from his childhood that he had inherited a gift for interpreting dreams, and he listened to their stories. He assured the cupbearer that his dream was a sign that he was going to be released within a few days. And Joseph asked him to mention him to the Pharaoh when he got there, but he forgot. And 2 more years passed. But finally, the Pharaoh has a dream that he can't let go of, that has disturbed him, and he's seeking an interpreter. No one could tell him the meaning until the cupbearer remembered Joseph. The Pharaoh had dreamed of 7 healthy cows being eaten by 7 thin, emaciated cows. It was a vivid dream that he just couldn't let go of. Not only did Joseph know how to interpret it, he had a solution. This dream was a sign that there would be 7 years of good harvest and plenty of food in the land. But those 7 years would be followed by 7 years of famine. The Pharaoh needed to appoint an overseer and begin to collect 1/5 of the produce of these 7 good years and store it away so it could be distributed when the famine years came. And he was so impressed with Joseph that he put him in charge of carrying out this plan. Joseph was 30 years old when he was given this responsibility. He worked through those 7 good years in Egypt. During that time, he got married. He had a few children. He was almost 40 when he encountered his brothers again. It had been 27 years since they had betrayed him. Now the famine was beginning to affect everyone in the region. Eventually, Father Jacob sent the older sons to Egypt to seek help from the one country that they heard had prepared for this time of famine. When they arrived, Joseph recognizes his brothers, but it didn't occur to them that this government official could in any way be their lost long sibling. Joseph wanted to know if they had changed as he had through the years, so he didn't reveal himself right away. He accused them first of maybe being spies, and he held one brother back in Egypt and told them they had to return home and bring back their youngest brother, Benjamin. And they did what he said. When they came back with Benjamin, he was thrilled. But Joseph had one more test. He gave them all a grand meal and welcomed them and then sent them home with some food. But a royal cup was placed in Benjamin's bag, and soldiers followed them and accused him of theft. They returned to face Joseph. Each of the brothers were pleading with him not to keep Benjamin, not to blame him. After all of these years, they had learned how to empathize with their father. They knew the loss of this youngest son would be too much for him to bear. Simeon was the one who had wanted to kill Joseph in the first place. He offered his own life in place of Benjamin. This is the moment that we started reading today. This is the place where Joseph is so filled with emotion that he could contain it no longer. And he yells for everyone to go away, and he begins to weep so loudly that they could hear it anyway. And through his tears, he begins to tell the truth. He tells the brothers who he is, how he came to be there. And they would certainly be a bit nervous. But he said, don't be distressed because of what you did. God has sent me before you to preserve life. And now you can come and settle in the land of Goshen. You can be near me, your children, your children's children. I will provide for you here. There are still 5 more years of this famine to live through. We come to that moment where love wins over hate, where they had moved beyond all of the distrust that they began with. They learned how to love. They surrendered their grudges and their resentments. Time and the trials of many years had allowed them to work through those obstacles, to grow in empathy and compassion, and finally forgiveness. Joseph had used his own pain to understand the pain of his fellow prisoners, used his gifts to help the very people who had imprisoned him. It's an unusual story, but it's a hopeful story. We ask, what does this have to do with us now? How do we incorporate this into our lives? Walter Bergman suggests that when we live according to our hate and our fears, our lives become small and defensive, lacking in the deep, joyous generosity of God. However, life in God is much, much larger, shattering our categories of control, permitting us to say that God's purpose can lead us to give and to forgive and to create a life we could not even have imagined. Joseph was able to look back on the experiences of being betrayed by family, years as life as a slave unjustly spent in jail, and finally see God's Spirit guiding, strengthening, supporting him, not just for himself, but for many people, to save them from the famine, to finally reunite his dysfunctional family. Now, we want to be clear that this is not God causing people to do harm for others. As Barbara Brown Taylor states, God is not a puppeteer, not making things happen, but God is more like an artist for whom nothing is too bent or too used, not even tragedies, not even bad decisions, not even plain human meanness. Here, Joseph is a work of art. God does not cause anyone to do evil, but it is the Spirit of God in us that seeks to bring good out of what was meant for evil, to transform human hearts, to reconcile broken relationships, to make space and time for forgiveness and new life to flourish. This is what this story has for us today. It is important to remember that these hero stories that we tell are not perfect people. Joseph's life has more layers to it. But this story, this point, this moment in the life of Joseph, we see a truth that God has promised not to take away all our pain and discomfort, but God has promised to be with us through it all, breaking those cycles of pain and revenge, transforming our losses into new possibilities for growth, for giving and receiving love and life. This is our hope in these difficult times, and this is why we sing.